U.S. rushes thousands of tons of weapons to Israel amid escalation risks. Iran's president and parliament speaker move to oust the foreign minister. Iran's currency collapses to record lows as Washington signals regime change. President Donald Trump imposes new sanctions on Cuba. Washington signals possible troop withdrawals from Italy and Spain. In less than 24 hours, the United States executed a military transport surge at a rarely seen pace. Roughly 6,500 tons of ammunition and equipment were delivered to Israel by both air and sea. The scale and speed go beyond defensive support. They signal a logistics system now postured for high-intensity operations. According to the United States Department of Defense, the operation was carried out simultaneously by two large cargo vessels docking at Ashdod and Haifa, combined with multiple strategic airlift missions. The shipment included munitions for both air and ground forces, along with transport trucks, JLTV, tactical vehicles, and a full range of support systems, indicating a comprehensive capability package, not piecemeal resupply. The operation was coordinated through a joint U.S.-Israel logistics network, spanning defense procurement agencies, international transport units, and planning divisions within the Israel Defense Forces. The supply chain had already been pre-positioned, ready to activate once thresholds were crossed. The logistical flow does not stop at 6,500 tons. Since the start of the conflict, Israel has received more than 115,000 tons of military equipment, delivered through 403 flights and at least 10 cargo ships. At Ashdod alone, under the supervision of Major General Ret Amir Bahram, total inbound volume has reached approximately 115,600 tons, putting Israel in a position for long-term stockpiling, not just sustaining the current campaign. This reflects a two-tier logistics system. Short-term, sustain continuous operational tempo. Long-term, build strategic reserves. Once offloaded, all equipment is distributed via hundreds of trucks within Israel's defense logistics system, then routed to bases nationwide. This points to Israel actively redistributing forces across the entire theater, preparing for multiple operational fronts. More importantly, the air and sea bridge has now become the backbone of combat readiness architecture. According to Israeli sources, at any given moment, aircraft and cargo ships are en route, carrying thousands of additional tons of weapons. This has evolved beyond resupply into a continuous flow logistics model, similar to what the U.S. employs in large-scale operations. The acceleration of U.S. deliveries goes beyond defense. Washington is shaping the conditions for Tel Aviv to sustain or expand military operations at high intensity as signals of a potential Iranian re-engagement grow clearer. This logistical flow is not just supporting the current war, it is preparing for the next phase of escalation. Iran's president and parliament speaker move to oust the foreign minister. What is unfolding inside Tehran points to something potentially more dangerous than external pressure. Iran's power structure is becoming deeply unbalanced. President Masoud Pezeshkian and Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf are reportedly attempting to remove Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, a rare move that signals a direct confrontation between the civilian government and the security establishment. According to sources close to the matter, the core issue is not Araghchi's diplomatic capability, but how he has been operating in practice. He is alleged to have acted under the direction of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, specifically under the influence of Ahmad Vahidi during nuclear negotiations, bypassing the president entirely. This marks a critical shift. Diplomacy traditionally under the executive branch is being militarized and reabsorbed by the security apparatus. Over the past 2 weeks, reports indicate that Araghchi has functioned more as an operational conduit for the IRGC than as a cabinet-level diplomat. In effect, Iran's external engagement is no longer reflecting government policy, but instead serving the strategic priorities of the IRGC. President Pezeshkian's response underscores the severity of the situation. He is said to have expressed deep internal frustration and warned that he may dismiss the foreign minister if the trend continues. But that reaction also reveals a deeper reality. The president may no longer have sufficient authority to enforce that decision. According to insiders, Ahmad Vahidi has taken a firm position. Under wartime conditions, all key and sensitive leadership roles must be directly selected and controlled by the IRGC until further notice. That stance carries major implications. It formalizes a de facto transfer of power from the civilian government to the military bloc. It elevates the IRGC from a security force to the central governing authority in wartime. And most importantly, it weakens Tehran's ability to maintain a unified political front under international pressure. What is happening is not just an internal personnel dispute. It is a signal that Iran may be entering a state of dual power, where the civilian government exists in form, but real control rests with the security apparatus. If this trajectory continues, Tehran faces a dual risk. Externally, incoherence in diplomacy as negotiation channels become fragmented. Internally, rising instability as economic and social pressures are no longer managed through formal government channels. In other words, while the risk of war is building outside, inside Iran, a structural power realignment is already underway, and it may ultimately determine how Tehran responds to the entire crisis. Iran's currency collapses to record lows as Washington signals regime change. Iran's national currency has fallen to its lowest level in history, directly reflecting the impact of an economic pressure campaign that is now being pushed to a higher level. At the same time, Washington is no longer stopping at financial measures. It is beginning to signal a new era for the Iranian people, implying a shift beyond traditional containment. Over the past 2 weeks, a US-led maritime blockade has emerged as the key variable. Shipping data shows that the operation has severely disrupted Iran's oil export flows, the lifeline of its economy. This is no longer indirect sanctioning, it is a direct strike on the country's financial bloodstream. Speaking on April 30, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent emphasized that Iran's currency is collapsing, its oil sector is weakening, and its current governing structure is no longer capable of securing an economic future for its people. The message has been repeated consistently, suggesting Washington is shifting from the language of sanctions to the language of post-crisis political shaping. On X, he reiterated that the rial has dropped to historic lows amid what he described as growing economic anger. That assessment is tied to a broader series of actions by the United States Department of the Treasury, sanctioning small-scale refineries in China to warning of secondary sanctions against international banks linked to Iran's oil revenues. Collectively, this is a campaign designed to choke both income streams and payment channels. He further stressed that the Iranian people deserve a new era, one the current system cannot deliver. With the oil sector stalled and the currency rapidly depreciating, Washington's message is becoming increasingly clear. Economic pressure is being used as a tool to reshape Iran's internal political environment. That pressure is already visible in real-world shipping data. No Iranian oil tankers have departed the Gulf of Oman since the blockade began. That effectively means exports have been almost entirely frozen, an outcome rarely seen even during previous sanction periods. US officials confirm that these measures have cut Tehran off from access to foreign currency revenues from crude oil, weakening its ability to sustain the state budget and maintain macroeconomic stability. At the same time, United States Central Command stated that the blockade, now in its third week, has significantly disrupted trade linked to Iran. The numbers illustrate the scale of impact. 41 tankers carrying a total of 69 million barrels are currently unable to reach the market, representing over $6 billion in frozen revenue. Just one day later, CENTCOM updated that 44 vessels had been forced to turn back under U.S. military directives, showing that enforcement is not only holding, but expanding. Meanwhile, the rial continues to slide against the US dollar, highlighting a dual pressure, collapsing revenues alongside rapid currency depreciation. For an economy heavily dependent on oil, this is a particularly dangerous combination. According to analyst Johannes Rabe, if the situation persists, Iran may be forced to cut production within 1 to 2 weeks due to storage constraints. That would mean the crisis no longer stops at exports, but begins feeding back into the entire energy production chain. The current campaign is not just weakening Iran's economy, it is generating enough pressure to potentially force systemic change. As the currency collapses, exports are blocked, and storage capacity is reached, the question is no longer how long Iran can endure, but when internal structures begin to respond under that pressure. President Donald Trump imposes new sanctions on Cuba. On May 1, President Donald Trump signed a new executive order significantly expanding sanctions against the Cuban government. The White House described the move as a response to a serious and extraordinary threat to U.S. national security, while also linking it to allegations of domestic repression and support for activities labeled as terrorism. Structurally, this sanctions package does more than just expand the list of targeted individuals and entities. It tightens the entire network surrounding them. Targets include members of Cuba's security apparatus, individuals accused of corruption or human rights violations, and entities engaged in transactions with these groups. Critically, the order authorizes secondary sanctions, targeting international financial institutions or individuals connected to these networks, effectively aiming to cut off all external funding channels. The White House emphasized geography and security, noting that Cuba lies less than 100 miles off the U.S. But the real focus is not distance, it is the role Havana is believed to play within a broader strategic competition framework. From Washington's perspective, Cuba has evolved into a Trojan horse for China in the Western Hemisphere, hosting intelligence facilities used for signals collection and communications surveillance. Locations such as Bejukal are believed to function as listening stations, while recent military training programs point to a growing Chinese presence right in America's backyard. This shifts Cuba from a bilateral issue into a node within US-China strategic competition, where intelligence, military, and technological dimensions converge. Beyond China, Washington also highlights Cuba's links to Iran and organizations such as Hezbollah. Under this framing, Cuba is not just a transit point, it is seen as actively supporting activities that undermine regional stability. Domestically, the Cuban government is accused of continuing to suppress opposition, restrict freedom of speech, and maintain a closed political system. The economic and social consequences have spilled outward. From 2022 through the fall of 2024, more than 850,000 migrants from Cuba entered the United States, placing direct pressure on immigration and border security systems. The new policy falls under the America First doctrine that Trump has reaffirmed, reversing earlier normalization efforts under Barack Obama. Washington has once again kept Cuba on the list of state sponsors of terrorism, while removing measures seen as ineffective in driving real change. The tightening strategy has been rolled out in phases. In June 2025, a National Security Presidential Memorandum, NSPM, was signed to cut financial flows linked to Cuba's military and increase financial restrictions. By January 2026, another order imposed punitive tariffs on countries supplying oil to Cuba, directly targeting a structural vulnerability in the island's energy supply chain. The White House places these measures within a broader demonstration of U.S. operational capacity. A series of recent operations are cited as proof of coordinated, multi-domain action, absolute resolve. targeting the government of Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela. Southern Spear, dismantling fentanyl trafficking networks and neutralizing 186 targets. Midnight Hammer and Epic Fury, combining precision strikes and economic pressure to degrade Iran's nuclear capabilities and financial base. Listing these operations is not just informational, it sends a clear signal. Washington is executing an integrated deterrence model where economic sanctions, military action, and intelligence tools are deployed simultaneously. The May 1 executive order is not just about expanding sanctions on Cuba. It reflects a broader repositioning, linking Cuba to competition with China, confrontation with Iran, and regional stability control. In this context, Havana is no longer a standalone file. It has become a strategic intersection within Washington's overall pressure architecture. Washington signals possible troop withdrawals from Italy and Spain. President Donald Trump is sending a notable signal: the potential reduction of U.S. forces in southern Europe, specifically in Spain and Italy. This is more than a routine troop adjustment. It reflects how Washington is increasingly tying security commitments to the level of strategic support from its allies. Speaking on April 30, Trump suggested that withdrawing some troops from Spain and Italy is under consideration, citing their limited role in the two-month conflict involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran. This marks a shift in deployment thinking from a model of persistent presence to one of conditional presence. Just one day earlier, the White House had also raised the possibility of reducing troop levels in Germany, one of the largest U.S. military hubs in Europe. Extending that signal to Spain and Italy suggests this is not an isolated move, but part of a broader strategic recalibration. According to the United States Department of Defense, as of December 2025, the U.S. has 12,662 troops stationed in Italy and 3,814 inches Spain. Italy ranks fourth globally in hosting U.S. troops, after Japan, Germany, and South Korea, highlighting its role in Mediterranean logistics and operations. Bases in Italy and Spain serve not only European defense, but also as launch platforms for operations in the Middle East and North Africa. Any adjustment here directly impacts U.S. rapid response capabilities across multiple theaters. When asked about applying similar measures to Spain and Italy, Trump responded bluntly, "Why shouldn't I? Italy didn't help, and Spain performed very poorly," Trump said. This statement must be understood in the context of the military campaign launched on April 28, aimed at preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons. From Washington's perspective, the level of Allied participation is becoming a key metric in evaluating the strategic value of force deployment. What this signals is, U.S. military presence is no longer a default, it is a lever, adjustable based on partner behavior. Tensions have also surfaced with Germany. The trigger was a remark by Chancellor Friedrich Merz on April 27, suggesting Iran was humiliating the United States in negotiations. Speaking in Marburg, Merz said Iran was very good at not negotiating, implying diplomatic failure after a U.S. delegation traveled to Islamabad without results. These comments directly touched on Washington's strategic decisions. Just 2 days later, Trump announced he was considering reducing troops in Germany, a response that underscores how closely diplomacy and military deployment are now linked. Berlin quickly moved to de-escalate, with Merz reaffirming that bilateral relations remain positive. Trump in turn shifted tone, urging Germany to focus more on the Russia-Ukraine war rather than weighing in on U.S. decisions. Taken together, Washington's messaging points to a clear trend. The U.S. is moving from a long-term commitment-based deployment model to one that is flexible, conditional, and tied to the political performance of its allies. If implemented, these changes will not just alter troop numbers. They could reshape transatlantic security architecture, where U.S. presence becomes a strategic lever rather than a fixed constant. So, the question is Is Washington consolidating its strategic position? Or is this just a prelude to a much larger shift? Let me know what you think, and don't forget to subscribe for the latest updates.